Now, at each event of the 12-race championship series, 2 classes were run. The first 8 races were made up of 125s and 250s. The last 4, the 500s went at it, while the 125s continued their championship chase. To make the championship season easy to follow, we'll take one class at a time and follow the competition from the first race of the season all the way to the championship finale. First up, the 125 class from Gainesville, Florida. At the Gainesville track, we had a couple of cameras to catch the highlighted action. Let's take a look at some of the competition in the 125 class. Defending champ Jeff Emig, Team Yamaha. Emig comes from Highland Ranch, California. Doug Henry from Connecticut, rider number 16 for Team Honda. The other Honda entry in the 125 class, the hottest rider on the circuit. He'd been ripping the Supercross series apart. Jeremy Mcgrath from Murrieta, California. Michael Craig is rider number 24. Craig from El Cajon, California, is a newly signed Kawasaki rider. And there were, of course, many veterans like Denny Stevenson for Team Suzuki. Let's watch the start of the highlighted season from Gatorback, Florida. The gate dropped on moto number 1. Michael Craig, the newly signed Kawasaki rider from El Cajon, took the early lead. Jeremy Mcgrath made a couple of passes on the first lap to settle back into second. Eric Kehoe was running third, Brian Swing fourth, and Doug Henry was fifth. Defending champ Jeff Emig, rider number 1, did not get a particularly good start, but from the drop of the gate, Emig was on the gas and moved quickly through the field. Meanwhile, at the head of the pack, on lap number 3, Jeremy Mcgrath had taken the number 1 position. In close pursuit was Michael Craig. Those 2 riders, battling each other, quickly pulled away from the rest of the field. The experts on the sideline were amazed. Jeremy Mcgrath was not supposed to be able to do that. The claim was he had not the endurance for outdoor motocross. Meanwhile, Doug Henry had cut a swath through the pack and had moved to the number 3 position. Well behind the leaders, rider number 43 was Ezra Lusk from Bainbridge, Georgia. Ezra's considered one of the top stars of the future, but Ezra on this day at Gatorback did not fare well at all. He would finish 10th in moto number 1 and 11th in moto number 2. Behind the leaders, most of the action took place. Jeff Emig in moto number 1 worked all the way up to the number 2 position. In the second moto, Emig was a DNF. A crash took him out of competition. Eric Kehoe, on the other hand, turned in 2 outstanding performances to finish second overall. He was 5th in the first moto and won moto number 2. Michael Craig turned in solid performances. A pair of 3rd place finishes gave him 3rd overall. The winner of the day, Jeremy Mcgrath. He finished 1st in the first moto and rounded that off with a 2nd in moto number 2. Mcgrath was proving the experts wrong. It appeared Mcgrath would be a factor in this 125cc championship series. Craig, Henry, Huffman finished 3rd, 4th, and 5th, with Kehoe, as we earlier said, finishing in the number 2 spot. The 1993 125cc National Championship chase was underway. From Gatorback, it was on to Southwick, Massachusetts. The Southwick track is touted as being one of the toughest on the circuit. It's made up of mostly sand that shifts on every circuit of the track. That creates new lines and new problems. For Jeremy Mcgrath, corner number 1 was a problem. Rider number 15 went down with a bunch of other riders, and Mcgrath, getting assistance from what appeared to be the entire contingent of Honda mechanics, got up and into the fray at the tail end of the pack. Meanwhile, up front, Doug Dubach had taken the hole shot. He would hold that number 1 position for 4 laps before being passed by rider number 43, Ezra Lusk. On the same lap, rider number 16, local favorite Doug Henry, would also take the measure of Dubach, and he would set out in pursuit of Ezra Lusk. There was the pass as Dubach swept into the number 3 spot by Henry's pass as he took over second. So it was Lusk, Henry, and Dubach at the end of 4 laps. With Henry putting the pressure on Ezra Lusk, the pair of riders quickly moved away from the rest of the field. Henry was dogging every move that Lusk made, first to the inside, then to the outside, and finally on a big sweeping right-hander, Henry left the gas on and took the measure of Ezra Lusk. Most of the eyes of the crowd were on the leaders. However, a few were looking back in the pack for Jeff Emig and Michael Craig. Where were they? Well, Emig fell on the opening straightaway, and Craig a few corners later. They were well at the back of the pack. When the checkered flag came out, it belonged to Doug Henry, his first ever championship moto win.
Doug, how's it feel to win a pro moto here in front of your hometown fans?
It feels great, man. They were cheering for me all the way. I loved it. I love it here. It's great.
When the gate dropped for moto number 2 at Southwick, the crowd was looking for more of the same, and they got it. There was an altercation in corner number 1, but all of the stars missed it on this go-around. In the second moto, Jeff Emig, the defending 125cc national champ, got a good start. He held off the charge of Doug Henry, who started in second place, for about a lap and a half. The two riders pounded away at the Southwick course. Henry going to the inside, then to the outside, with Emig blocking every move. Finally, Doug Henry would take the measure of Jeff Emig with just about a lap and a half gone in moto number 2. And Emig would hold on to the number 2 position throughout the remainder of the moto as Doug Henry would sweep to the win. The checkered flag is out. Doug Henry crosses the line. He wins moto number 2, goes 1-1 on the day for the overall win, the first in national championship competition for the rider from Bolton, Connecticut. Ezra Lusk with moto finishes of 2-6 finished second overall, followed by Larry Ward. Then Jeff Emig, who put together a 14-2 pair of motos, and Ryan Hughes rounding out the top 5. The championship standings after 2 rounds. Doug Henry is on top with 86 points. Then Jeremy Mcgrath, the young man they said couldn't ride outdoor motocross, is in second place. Eric Kehoe, Ezra Lusk, Michael Craig rounding out the top 5. High Point Raceway, Mount Morris, Pennsylvania, was the site of round 3 of the National Championship Series. Highly touted rookie, 593, Robbie Raynard, put in his appearance only 3 days after turning 16 and obtaining his pro license. Raynard, the holder of many amateur national titles, looking to take that talent, transfer it over to the pros. For the day, Raynard did not do all that bad. He crashed in his qualifiers, still got up to finish 3rd, and turned in 2 outstanding motos to finish with a 7th and an 8th overall. First corner out of sight of our camera, big crash, big pileup, claimed several of the top stars in moto number 1. Not Jeff Emig, though, our defending champ. He got the whole shot, and he would sweep to the victory. Did claim, however, Doug Henry. See the shroud hanging off the side of his bike? Henry picked himself up. He was toward the rear of the pack. He still managed to finish in the number 2 position in moto number 1. The crash was triggered by Jeremy Mcgrath, rider number 15. He slid out. A bunch of riders went with him. For the day, Doug Henry would finish 2nd and 3rd for 2nd overall. Mcgrath would take home a 3rd and 4th. He finished 3rd overall. Robbie Raynard, as we said, turning in an outstanding performance for a first-time rookie as he finished with a 7th and an 8th on this tough Mount Morris track. Up front, though, it was all Jeff Emig. The Team Yamaha rider and defending champ swept to a pair of moto wins to put himself back in contention for the title.
Well, both motos is definitely the way to win it. And from a start to finish, both motos, you know, I couldn't ask for any more. You know, there at the end, I'm kind of telling myself, you know, you've done this before, let's just keep calm, and do this again.
Well, you really made a statement today, haven't you?
Oh yeah, like that's what I'm gonna try. The year has been so-so for me, but I'm here to show the last year's champion's back, and he wants it again.
Well, last year's champ made a believer out of me. Moto finishes of 1-1. The overall goes to Jeff Emig. 3 races, 3 different winners to date. Doug Henry, Jeremy Mcgrath, Ryan Hughes, Eric Kehoe rounded out the top 5. Let's take a look at the point standings after 3 events down of the 12. Doug Henry on top with 128, Mcgrath in 2nd with 103, then Emig vaulted all the way from 6th place up to 3rd. Points-wise, he was still a long way back. From Pennsylvania, the series moved west for the silver anniversary running of the Hangtown Classic in Sacramento, California. Moto number 1, Ezra Lusk, Team Suzuki's Ezra Lusk from Bainbridge, Georgia, took the whole shot, and Ezra, long touted to be one of the faster riders on the 125cc circuit, looked like he had things pretty well set up for a great day of motocross. But Ezra, as he is prone to do, loses concentration and takes a little dirt nap. Watch this. Bang. Ezra catches the fence pole with his right arm and goes down. We'll go back and take another look at this unfortunate incident that took Ezra out of contention for the overall win in Sacramento. Here he comes. Now watch him. He cuts it just a little bit too close, loses control of the Suzuki, and just like that, Ezra is on the ground. That gave the lead to rider number 1, the defending champ, Jeff Emig. Emig was being chased by Jeremy Mcgrath. Those 2 riders pulled away from the pack. Meanwhile, Rider number 16, Doug Henry, from out of the pack, made this pass on Eric Kehoe, rider number 22, take over the number 3 position. But up front, it was Jeff Emig taking moto number 1. Finishing in the number 2 position was Jeremy Mcgrath, with Doug Henry finishing 3rd. The second moto started out where moto number 1 left off. Jeff Emig was out in front, but not for long. Now, Emig managed to miss the altercation at the rear of the pack, but watch coming up. Emig gets sideways, he'll lose control, and he is down on the ground. Now, that's just the start of Emig's problems. He's trying to pick the motorcycle up, but no cooperation from his friends as they knock the handlebars, the wheels, and then the pins out from under Jeff Emig. He'll wait till the rest of the pack passes. He jumps back over the top of the motorcycle and finally gets going. He'll be dead last. Now, from that point, Emig really got on the gas, made no more mistakes for the day. As a matter of fact, by the time second moto was over, Jeff Emig had swept all the way to the number 7 position. He had to pass some 33 riders to get there. The win in moto number 2 gave Jeremy Mcgrath the overall win for the day, followed by Doug Henry, then Jeff Emig, James Dobb, Brian Swink. Let's take a look at the championship point standings, and we'll go to Jeremy Mcgrath.
Well, I just tried to ride the moto the same as I did the first time. I think I lasted a little bit longer than that time. I think the heat got to me a little bit more in the first moto, and I think I didn't let it get to me that time.
From California, the 125cc Championship Series headed east to Buchanan, Michigan for round 5. Here are the highlights as seen on Prime Network. At the drop of the gate, an all-too familiar sight this year, Jeremy Mcgrath, the Team Honda rider, with the hole shot. But that's not going to last for long. Behind him, Scott Sheik will take over the number 1 position, and that is where the action started in moto number 1. Sheik is ahead at this point. There's Mcgrath. Running behind Mcgrath comes Ezra Lusk, then Brian Swink. There's Doug Henry, the points leader, Jeff Emig, and James Dobb. Watch this. Sheik was able to get back up and fired up the 125 Kawasaki all in one motion and got back in line. I'll tell you what, his day in the sun, his day of glory was over at that point. Meanwhile, Jeff Emig, 125cc national champ, was on the gas. Jeremy Mcgrath is out front at this point with Ezra Lusk running second and Emig coming from out of the pack in the number 3 slot. He disposed of Lusk and caught up to the rear wheel of Mcgrath. Now, Mcgrath would prove just about as tough to get around as Ezra Lusk and the rest of the riders in the field, and we're going to see Jeff Emig in the number 1 position in the opening moto of this 125 class. Emig won his first ever national at Redbud just 1 year ago and looks set to repeat that outing here today. So with Jeff Emig out front, Jeremy Mcgrath running in the number 2 position, Emig will wave goodbye to the rest of the field and he'll streak for the checkered flag. Meanwhile, here comes Doug Henry, and Henry too was on the gas. He was following the lead set by his teammate Jeremy Mcgrath in the early going. Matter of fact, he went by Mcgrath and said, "You follow me for a while, I'll show you how to get it done here." Henry would end up in the number 2 position. Here comes the checkered flag. Here comes Jeff Emig. There was just a little fist pumper for the crowd, and he takes moto number 1. Let's jump to moto number 2 and watch the starting straightaway action. Keep your eyes glued to the back of this pack. Wham! Bam! Sit that motorcycle upright. Now let's try to pry them apart. I want to tell you, they were tangled. We had AMA officials, we had mechanics. Before it was over, I think they brought in a crane and a bulldozer to separate the motorcycles on the start. All the riders got up and walked away. Meanwhile, walking away from the pack was Jeff Emig. Said, "I had enough of that following dust and all of that work trying to pass riders in the first moto." So he just showed him the short way around. Jeremy Mcgrath in second. There was Eric Kehoe in the number 3 spot. Here's the Englishman, James Dobb, running in the number 4 position. Want to see a great cross-up? Watch this. Jeff Emig over the top of the finish line jump shows the world how to do it at Redbud. Here are the top 5. Jeff Emig finishing in the number 1 position. As we pointed out, with a pair of moto wins, he was followed by Mcgrath, and Doug Henry was 3rd overall. James Dobb 4th. Good outing for the Englishman, Eric Kehoe, rounding out the top 5. Point standings, Doug Henry still on top. But take a look at the gap between himself and Emig. Once it was 35 points, now down to 18. Kehoe in 4th, and Ezra Lusk holding down the 5th position. Round 6 of the Championship Series was in New Berlin, New York at the famed Unadilla racetrack. Unadilla, long touted as the toughest and nastiest and most unforgiving track in the United States, lived up to its reputation on this day. Suzuki's Ezra Lusk grabbed the hole shot. That's Scott Sheik running in the number 2 position. Third place was Jeff Emig, but not for long. There Emig drops back to 4th, and here Emig drops to the ground. He'll be passed by a passel of riders. He picks the Yamaha up. He kept it running and got back into the fray, but he had lost several positions. So out front, Ezra Lusk and James Dobb going at it. Now right behind them, number 16 is Doug Henry. He's in 3rd. That's Scott Sheik, who had dropped back to the number 4 position. There were battles going on all over this racetrack. Now this is Scott Sheik. He's dropped off the pace set by Doug Henry. He's currently holding the number 4 position. This is Larry Ward, rider number 9, looking for just a little bit of running room, and he found it as Sheik went wide in the corner, and Ward took advantage of the situation. Then the tough Unadilla track took advantage of Scott Sheik. He was down. He got going again, but as you'll soon see, Scott Sheik's troubles were really just beginning. Doug Henry, meanwhile, having problems of his own. His Honda had died, and what a place for it to die, in the middle of all of the banners. The mechanics trying to sort that thing out, but for Henry, it was going to be to no avail. He would finish 32nd in Moto number 1. His day was over. Meanwhile, there's the leader, and there goes James Dobb. He's the new leader. Ezra Lusk, astraddle of that huge berm that had been built up on the Unadilla track, couldn't get the Suzuki off that berm, and he lost a considerable amount of ground. Now, you remember Scott Sheik? He was the first rider to fall victim to the dusty conditions at Unadilla. Sucked his carburetor full of the stuff, as did Ezra Lusk. Meanwhile, James Dobb from England, rider number 100, takes the win in Moto number 1. Can he repeat? Well, we'll go next to Moto number 2, and we'll see. The gate goes down, and the field is off. Now, hard to tell from this angle who's doing what, but take my word for it. Jeremy Mcgrath is out front. He's followed by James Dobb. Doug Henry was running 3rd, Eric Kehoe, then Jeff Emig. So all of the championship contenders were up front. Now notice the dust clouds. This was the big difference between Unadilla this year and in previous years. Normally, when the pros take to the track at Unadilla for practice, the track is, well, it's covered with 3 foot of grass. But this year, for the first time, amateurs were set to knock that grass down as they held an amateur national championship the day prior to the pros running at Unadilla. That left the track in, well, suspect conditions. Ward Robinson, the proprietor at Unadilla, says come back next year. You'll not see the same thing at all. We'll make that correction. Meanwhile, Jeremy Mcgrath out front. He's chased by Jeff Emig, and there's the battle for the number 3 position between Doug Henry and James Dobb. And James Dobb, the Englishman, ever so polite, moves over and lets Henry blast by to take over the number 3 position. About 10 laps in, Jeff Emig made that move, and he took over the lead from Jeremy Mcgrath. Mcgrath said thank you very much, and he rebounded to take back the number 1 slot. Jeff Emig, though, had his mind made up. He was tired of eating the roost in the dust from Jeremy Mcgrath, so on the very next corner, he again took over the number 1 position. Then it was Doug Henry's turn. Doug Henry took the limelight from his teammate as he captured the number 2 position, dropping Mcgrath back to 3rd. Now, Henry had scored no points in Moto number 1. In fact, the championship lead had dissolved in between motos. He dropped back to 2nd place in the standings. With that pass on Jeff Emig, though, he would go on to take the number 1 position and hold it to the checkered flag, giving Henry the points lead back. Now, here's Henry sweeping toward the checkered flag. There's Emig on the outside. Henry takes the win in the moto. Emig finishes in the number 2 position. The overall win fell to James Dobb aboard the Pro Circuit Split-Fire Hot Wheels Kawasaki with a 1 and a 4. Mcgrath, Emig, Ward, and Kehoe rounded out the top 5.
Also, I'd just like to thank all the fans for coming and cheering me on. I know I'm from England, but it's a great helping all you Americans getting behind me. I do appreciate it. I feel that I am getting to be an American now, and I'd just like to thank Mike LaRocco and Mike Senior as well for all the help they've given me in the last 2 weeks.
Next up, round 7 from Troy, Ohio. Here are the highlights as seen on Cycle World on Prime Network. Now, Ezra Lusk, rider number 43, will take the hole shot, but no one was watching. The attention of the crowd was focused on the rear of the pack where this major crash took place. Jeremy Mcgrath is involved. He'll be to the extreme left-hand side of your screen. The rider in green in the middle, that's James Dobb, the winner from Unadilla, the Englishman. Dobb broke his wrist. He's going to be out for the rest of the year. Jeremy Mcgrath was up and away, but a long way to go to be a factor in this first moto at Troy. Up front, it was Ezra Lusk holding the #1 position with Jeff Emig in tow. Emig was not going to stay there long. He swept past Lusk to take over the #1 position. Rider number 19 from out of the pack, Brian Swink, would end up third. Here comes the finish. That's Doug Henry, who had moved to the #2 slot, and he was right on Emig's rear wheels. What happened to Lusk? Well, he finished 33rd. Not a good outing in Moto #1. Let's go to the second Moto highlights, and history will repeat itself. Jeremy Mcgrath will end up on the ground in corner #1, and again, he'll have to start his trek. There's Mcgrath in the middle. Now he'll flash past the camera. He's going to be to the extreme outside of that corner. Several other riders went down, but pay no attention to them. The guy you want to watch is Mcgrath. He'll have to begin his trek toward the front, again from the rear of the pack. Mcgrath had a long, long day in Troy, Ohio. Meanwhile, Jeff Emig was holding down the #1 position. Running into #2 slot was Ezra Lusk. Now, you've heard of bad hair days? Well, Ezra Lusk was having a bad motorcycle day. For the second consecutive moto, Bainbridge, Georgia rider started up front and worked his way to the rear of the pack. His troubles are not yet over. Watch this. He gets into a shoving match with Jeremy Mcgrath. Mcgrath wins. He keeps on going while Lusk goes down for the count. He would end up in the #11 position in Moto #2. At the head of the pack, Jeff Emig for Team Yamaha, the defending 125cc champ, was having things his way. We're going to show you a rider that was not having things his way. That was Scott Sheik. Why is he here, you say? He was not a factor in the race. Well, watch this and you'll see. Boom! It was just a nice little get-off, and we thought you would like to see it. Sheik got up and got back into the race action. He was okay. Here comes Jeff Emig to claim the checkered flag. Second moto win of the day. That's going to put Emig into the points lead. The defending champ is back on top. Doug Henry will collect his second place of the day as he pulls off the racetrack. So overall, it was Emig, Henry, Huffman, and Mcgrath in that order. Let's take a look at the point standings after 7 rounds. We're past the midway point, where Jeff Emig has now moved to the top of the leaderboard. 280 points. Doug Henry is in second place, just 3 points back with 277. Then comes Mcgrath and Eric Kehoe. Glen Helen Off-Highway Vehicle Park in San Bernardino, California, was the site of round 8 of the championship series, and it was the site of a brand new format in motocross. As a matter of fact, it's a format that has been around for a while, but in Supercross, heat races determine the lineup for the main event, and then only one main event rather than the 2 motos. Now, this is action from heat race #1. Doug Henry is out front, but not for long. That's his teammate Jeremy Mcgrath doing the pushing and shoving, and he gets by to take over the #1 position. Mcgrath will go on to take the win. Henry will finish in the #2 position. Third place is the property of rider number 86. That's Damon Huffman out of Canyon Country, California. Here is the way they finished in heat race #1. Mcgrath, again Henry, and Huffman rounding out the top 3. This is the second qualifying heat. Now, the top 16 riders go from the heat races into the main event. Now, watch the pileup in heat race #2. You want to talk about a major traffic jam? Here it is. They were spread all over the corner. A couple of riders getting up and eyeing each other. That's Robbie Raynard, rider number 593. They're looking at each other like, that must have been your fault. Of course, the other guy says, it wasn't my fault. I wasn't anywhere around. This is the battle for the runner-up position. Eric Kehoe is currently in the #2 slot, rider number 22. Jeff Emig, incidentally, is long gone, and that was our old friend Ezra Lusk. And Ezra, in going for the gold there and all of the gusto, tried to make the pass on Kehoe. He came up a little bit short, ran off the edge of the track. He ended up in the #3 position. So Emig wins it. Kehoe, Lusk, and Swink, and another 12 riders beyond them qualify to go into the main event. Again, the top 16 out of each of the first 2 heat races go to the main. One final opportunity. If you've not made the main, it's the last chance qualifier. We're only going to take 8 riders from the last chance qualifier, and it's rider number 777, Terry Parsons, followed by Todd DeHoop, taking the win. Those 2 riders will lead another 6 into the main. Brian Roth finished in the #3 slot. Scott Sheik was 4th. At that point in time, you can bet that all 8 riders that did make it were just happy to be there. So one main event, it's worth double points. Instead of 25 points for winning each moto, you're going to get a total of 50 if you can win the main here at San Bernardino. Out of the gate and around corner number 1, the field was led by the familiar number 1 plate, the defending champ of Jeff Emig. The folks in the back of the pack, at least a couple of them, never got to appreciate that view. Now, right on Emig's rear wheel, rider number 16, Doug Henry. Now, they're 1-2 in the series, and they're 1-2 in this single moto affair at San Bernardino. That positioning is about to change. Watch this. I don't know. Did Henry cut him off, or did Emig just get a little too close on the inside? Here it is again. Looks like that contact may have been initiated when Henry came across the front of Jeff Emig. Well, we'll never know. All is fair in love and war and motocross. Jeff Emig picked himself up off the ground. He was in the number 2 position at that point. Emig is not going to stay there. Out front, it's Doug Henry. Now, Henry has been the picture of consistency throughout the season. Take a look at the overall finishes. In Gainesville, a 4th. He took his only win of the season in Southwick. He then followed that with a pair of 2nd places, then a 3rd. His worst outing was at Unadilla when he had a DNF for a 32nd place finish in Moto number 1. That's the reason that Jeff Emig was not able to hold on to that number 2 position. He was riding along and his motorcycle started to sputter and just died. Now, Emig had given up, took off his goggles. Now watch this. He should have been kicking that motorcycle for all he was worth, but he let up on the track. I suspect he just suffered a slight mental letdown. He finally got it going again, and he would end up in the number 4 position and probably would not have been able to do any better than that had he gotten the bike fired right away. But still, that's not what you want to do on a motocross track in the heat of battle. Doug Henry takes the win, and look who finished 2nd, Ezra Lusk. When Ezra keeps the motorcycle upright, this guy is tough. Here's the way 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th finished. It was Ryan Hughes, Mcgrath, Kehoe, and Larry Ward. Now, after the main event was over, I'm going to tell you, Doug Henry had some problems. It was awfully hot in San Bernardino, and it affected Henry. Henry later said it was a combination of heat and smog that got to him. Well, I'm going to tell you, that guy was in rough shape. That's Jim Holly that's administering first aid. Holly was the Prime Network color analyst, along with Bevo Forte, dumping water on his head. Holly was there to, well, do an interview. Instead, he helped with the undressing. Now, the win put Henry back into the number 1 position in the point standings. Let's hear what he has to say about the heat.
Yeah, it was really bad. It really didn't hit me till about 3 or 4 laps ago, you know. People were cheering for me, you know, it was great. You can hear them now, boy. It was really great out here. There are a lot of fans out here.
The Pacific Northwest, Washougal, Washington, was the site of round 9 of the 125cc Championship Series. Here are the highlights as seen on Prime Network. Moto number 1, it was all Jeff Emig. Emig, as a matter of fact, looked behind him a time or two, wondering where the rest of the field went, and he saw no one. He was just flat gone. Running into number 2 position, Ezra Lusk, for the 2nd consecutive week, rider number 43 aboard his Suzuki, was keeping the motorcycle upright and cutting a swath through this track and through lap riders. Holding down to number 3 position was rider number 19, Brian Swink. There was Swink. He was being chased by Jeremy Mcgrath, and in 5th place, number 16, was Doug Henry. But out front, it was all Jeff Emig. He took moto number 1 in a lapper. And you know what? He did the same thing in moto number 2. There goes Emig from the middle of the pack. Emig steals the whole shot, and he is flat gone. Emig could have looked around for the closest competitor had he taken time to do that. He'd have seen no one. Looking way back in the track, he might have seen Ezra Lusk for the 2nd consecutive moto. Lusk was putting it all together. The Team Suzuki star managed to stay upright one more time, and he would sweep to his 3rd second place in as many races. Rider number 27 is John Dowd. The 250cc National Championship Series was over, and those riders without 500cc mounts had to do something the rest of the year. So Dowd and a whole flock of others, including Damon Bradshaw, turned their talents toward the 125 class. The talents, though, of Jeff Emig gave the Team Yamaha star the overall win for the day, and a pair of moto wins, followed by a pair of 2nds in Ezra Lusk and Jeremy Mcgrath with a 4-3. Then came Doug Henry with a 5th and a 4th. So the lead changed hands one more time. Emig, with 4 wins, was again on top of the leaderboard, with Henry just 5 points behind, then Mcgrath and Eric Kehoe.
Jeremy Mcgrath, Ezra Lusk, and Jeff Emig, your 125 class champions.
Spring Creek Motocross Park in Millville, Minnesota was the site of round 10 of the National Championship Series. It's also the site of one of the nastiest sections of whoop-de-doos anywhere in the United States. Coming through the pack, two-time world champion Donnie Schmidt, who hails from Bloomington, Minnesota. What was Donnie Schmidt doing at Millville, Minnesota? Well, we asked him earlier in the day.
This year I kind of had a bad year, and I felt that I maybe have lost some of my speed since I went to Europe, and I think it's going to help me a little bit to improve my speed, and especially riding with the 125 guys, the young guys, really aggressive. I'm riding 3 nationals, so hopefully I can, you know, learn a little bit, never too old to learn, and maybe get some good finishes also.
Well, a good finish in Moto number 1 was 8th place overall. Not too shabby for a man that's been away from the United States motocross for as many years as Donnie had. Out front, familiar figures, Jeff Emig, but Emig did not stay there very long. As a matter of fact, at that point in the track, Emig fell on 2 occasions. Well, he's going to pick himself up and still manage to finish in the number 2 position. He'll be chasing his old nemesis, the guy that has been in the lead more often than not in the championship series, Doug Henry, rider number 16. Finishing in the number 2 slot, as I said, was Emig. 3rd place went to Jeremy Mcgrath. With the second moto about to get underway, take note of the track conditions. Now, earlier in the day, that was nothing but a quagmire, a sea of mud. It had rained 2 days prior at Millville. The track crew at Millville did an excellent job. Around the corner, that big sweeping right-hander. A good start for Jeff Emig 2 times in a row. Emig is out front and leading the rest of the field. Now look at this nasty set of whoops. You ever seen anything like that in your life? And the lines change each time the riders come through those sections. Now, some bikes will spit a little sand up and throw sand one direction or another. The next time the guy comes through, it's completely different, and it is just one of the nastiest motocross sections in the United States. For Donnie Schmidt, the day ended early in Moto number 2. He was involved in a crash. The pipe was crushed. He lost all power on the Yamaha. Color him gone. Back to the front of the pack, watch Ezra Lusk. He just moved into the number 2 position. Now, that was not a lack of concentration, I assure you. That was just the nastiness of that Millville track. It is one tough track, voted in the eyes of some riders as the toughest track to ride in America. Back in the bushes, that's Doug Henry. Now, that's a mistake that you do not see too often, at least from Doug Henry. He ran off the edge of the track. Henry would get back up and still finish in the number 2 position. At the head of the pack, Jeff Emig was checkered flag bound. He would win Moto number 2, giving him the overall win for the day. There were no mistakes in that second moto. So it was Jeff Emig with a 2-1 score, wrapping up the overall, followed by Doug Henry with a 1-2, then Jeremy Mcgrath, and Ezra Lusk with good rides to finish 4th overall. With 2 events to go, Jeff Emig with 5 wins is on top of the championship points leaderboard, followed by Doug Henry. Jeremy Mcgrath out of contention, as is Ezra Lusk in 4th. Round 11, Binghamton, New York, as seen on Prime Network. Here are the 125cc highlights. The gate dropped on Moto number 1. It would be Doug Henry capturing the whole shot, followed by Emig, Ryan Hughes, Todd DeHoop, Ezra Lusk, and Jeremy Mcgrath. The back part of the pack, little altercation going on. Robbie Raynard was one of the riders involved, and despite the time spent arguing over who was at fault, Raynard would pick himself up and finish 7th in the moto. Out front, it was Doug Henry, followed by Jeff Emig. Holding down the number 3 position was Ezra Lusk. Then came Jeremy Mcgrath. A few corners later, and Emig was gone. Still on the opening lap, the front end washed out from under his Yamaha. He hit the ground, had to pick himself up and start working through traffic. Now, Mcgrath had passed Ezra Lusk, but watch this. Mcgrath makes a rare mistake on a motocross track. And Ezra Lusk repasses to regain the number 2 position. While that was going on, Jeff Emig was on the gas. He was passing lap riders at a rather rapid clip, and he would work all the way up to the number 4 slot before the moto was over. Mcgrath moved back around Lusk to take control of the number 2 slot, while Ryan Hughes also passed Lusk. He was turning in his best moto of the season, and he would end up in the number 3 position. Meanwhile, it was rider number 16, Doug Henry, taking the checkered flag. Moto number 2, and a surprise hole shot by Jimmy Gaddis. Earlier in the season, Gaddis had captured the 125cc Western Supercross Championship, had not been a factor in the outdoor season to date, but he was certainly a factor in the opening laps of Moto number 2 here at Broome Tioga. Did not stay there long as Doug Henry swept around Gaddis to take control of the number 1 position. Now, toward the end of the moto, Henry had company. His teammate, Jeremy Mcgrath, was camped on his rear wheel. Team tactics involved here? Who knows, but Mcgrath made no effort to pass. Coming up in the number 3 position is Robbie Raynard. With just a couple of laps to go, Raynard would be camped on the rear wheel of the leaders. Jeff Emig, all the way from the back of the pack, had moved up to 5th. Now here's the finish. There's Doug Henry, and Mcgrath holding off Robbie Raynard. They finished that close. The overall win goes to Doug Henry with a pair of moto victories. Jeremy Mcgrath was 2nd. Ryan Hughes, his best performance of the season, was 3rd. And Robbie Raynard finished 4th overall. Finishing 5th was Jeff Emig. So after 11 of 12 events, just 1 to go, Doug Henry is on top of the leaderboard with 458, then Jeff Emig with 447. The number 1 plate in the 125cc National Championship Series would be decided in the final round. Jeff Emig, the defending champion, was in the position of the pursuer. The rider he was pursuing, Doug Henry, the series points leader. For Emig, it was familiar territory. 1 year earlier, with 2 rounds to go, Emig was 48 points behind Mike LaRocco. He closed the gap and won the championship by 19. With the first moto underway, Ezra Lusk, rider number 43, was in an all-too-familiar position. It was not Lusk's fault, but Ezra Lusk would be at the tail end of the pack. Todd DeHoop was the leader, followed by Raynard, then Swink, then Emig, and Doug Henry. In the number 6 position came Jeremy Mcgrath. Now, common sense dictates when you have an 11-point lead and you're down to the season finale, that if you can keep your eye on the guy that's chasing you in the points, if you can stay right behind him, then you'll wrap up the title. But that's not the way Doug Henry played it in moto number 1. He was content to follow for a while, but when the opportunity presented, Doug Henry whipped the throttle up and went for the glory and the gold. He tried this pass and made it stick. Doug Henry was now in front of his closest competitor in the championship chase. Is that a good place to be with the title on the line? Well, I'll let you make that decision. Todd DeHoop, meanwhile, was holding down the number 1 position in admirable fashion. Doug Henry had passed Robbie Raynard to take over the number 2 position. Raynard was in 3rd and Emig back in 4th. When Raynard went wide, Emig cut to the inside off a jump to take over the number 3 position. He kept the momentum up and swept by Doug Henry to take over the number 2 slot. So it was Todd DeHoop out front, Jeff Emig in 2nd, and in 3rd it was Doug Henry. 4th belongs to Raynard, then DeHoop bobbled, and Emig swept into the number 1 position. Now remember, there are 11 points separating Jeff Emig and Doug Henry in the championship chase. They flashed through the mechanics signal area. The excitement was evident by all as Henry took a wide line around the outside of Todd DeHoop, and now Henry is in the number 2 position. So with Emig out front and Henry in 2nd, watch this. Henry overcooked a corner and shot off the end of the track. That could have been the end of the title chase. The first order of business for Henry was picking up the motorcycle, then praying it would start, and it did on the first kick. Henry joined the fray. He had lost several positions, but would you believe this? By the end of the moto, Henry would have worked back to the number 2 position. Emig took the win, and with it, the valuable points for first place. Now, here's the way they finished in moto number 1. It was Jeff Emig on top. Doug Henry, after that near disastrous crash, worked back up to 2nd. Then Brian Swink and Jeremy Mcgrath rounding out the top 4. Let's take a look at the points difference. 480 after the first moto for Doug Henry. Jeff Emig 472, an 8-point margin as Emig gained 3. The final moto of the 125cc National Championship season. Watch the rider on the extreme right side of your screen, the right end of the starting gate. That's Doug Henry. Watch what happens. Henry is caught in the gate. That's exactly what Jeff Emig needed to win the championship. Now, where is Emig? Now watch the highlighted portion of the screen. There is Emig at the tail end of the pack. Now coming up, you'll see where Doug Henry is. There's Henry. Henry is dead last, and just in front of him is Jeff Emig. Now the 2 riders, as the moto progressed, worked their way through traffic. Henry was never out of sight of Jeff Emig. He could always see his nemesis, so he knew exactly where he was as the moto wore on. Out front, not that anyone was paying attention, Robbie Raynard holding down the number 1 position, being chased by Ezra Lusk. The eyes of the crowd were drawn to the back part of the racetrack as the 2 championship contenders began dicing through traffic. Henry caught Jeff Emig, then made the pass. By the end of the moto, Henry would work up to 6th with Emig in 7th. The moto win, though, would fall to the youngster, Robbie Reynard, the rookie, and with the moto win would come the overall victory. Behind Reynard, the championship was still up for grabs, but just barely. With that checkered flag, Doug Henry was declared the 1993 125cc national champ. Robbie Reynard took the overall win at Delmont, Pennsylvania. Jeff Emig with moto finishes of 1-7 finished 2nd overall. Doug Henry was 3rd overall with moto finishes of 2-6. Here's a look at the final standings with Henry declared 1993 champ. Let's hear what the new champion has to say. How good does it feel, Doug?
Feels great, you know, especially with all these people here. I'm glad all the people came down. And I know I had a lot of fans there. I'm glad I was able to win the championship.
What went through your head when you got caught in the gate?
Well, I knew I could still win, you know, or, you know, I knew I'd be able to move up quick, you know, even though I got a bad start. But I fell over there in the first lap, and I was really nervous from there on.